Okay, and now we're just going to go and look at the DNS server, and we're going to go into, well, what we're going to do is we're going to go into Server Manager, and it's collecting data for the roles. Right now we've got DHCP, DNS, file services. So what we want to do first is to remove the role of DNS. And okay, just hit next off the introductory page. We need to select DNS. And next. And it's going to remove it, and we'll do that. That was just saying that it would have to be connected to a different DNS server, but all we're going to do is remove it and then reinstall it so we can see the process. And this is going to take a while, so we will come back when it is ready. Okay, we're back, and that did take a restart and a good period of time, but you can see DNS, the removal was successful. So now all we're going to do, and now we just have DHCP and our file services. And now we're just going to reverse the process and put it back in. And we'll next for whatever that said, and we'll put DNS in. And just next to the introductory, and install it. And give this a minute to see what happens. And you know, remember when we install it, we're just installing it. It's not configured. So after it gets installed, then it'll have to be configured. And so it says the installation was successful. So now we will go to configure it. Now, okay, and now we're taking a look at in Server Manager, and it has our DHCP server, DNS, and file services. Now we can look at the DNS server if we just click on roles and go in DNS server, but I think the preferred way is to get out of Server Manager, and then if you go down to the Start menu, you can go into Administrative Tools. Now this has all of the roles that the server can have, and services and roles. And here's our DHCP, but here's DNS. And so we want to take a look at configuring DNS. So here's what we've got, and here's our server. And unfortunately we didn't give it a better name, but that's our server. Now we have forward lookup zones, and there's nothing in it, and reverse lookup zones, there's nothing in that. Now the forward lookup zone is basically taking the easy to remember name, like helpingup.org, and associating it with the number 137.214.37.53 or whatever it would be. The reverse zone is just doing the opposite. It can take the number and bring it back to the name. Now, the names are easily remembered, but the numbers aren't. But we have to remember that the computer cannot use a name. It needs the number. So what we have is for since we have nothing in the forward lookup zone, we're going to add a zone. So we can go in here and put in a new zone. And this will ask us. Now here it says primary zone, secondary zone, whatever stub zone is. But the primary zone is kind of like the official copy. The secondary zone is just a copy of the primary zone, and it's used for if you want two servers. So if one of them happens to not be active, the other one can be used. But we only have one in our system, so we're going to do that. And since we only have one, and so this is when you have the secondary one. How do you want the data replicated from the primary to the secondary? And since we only have one, we probably don't really care. And what's the zone name? And we will call it helping up dot And what we're going to do is we're going to give it the same name as our domain controller. And I'm pretty sure that's valid. Now, dynamic updates. For the moment, we're not going to dynamically update it, but we'll have, and we'll probably have a second part 2 of this DNS where we're going to put dynamic updates. And that's where we tie DNS to the DHCP server. And finish, this is going to say our helping up local is going to be our primary. And what we have in there is we have start of authority, we have a name server. I'm not quite sure what that is, but it lists our server in here, and it gives the name and also what the address is. Now if we look in our reverse zone, we still have nothing, so we're going to add a zone for that. Now this is a little bit different. Before and it's primary, and we can do that. And it's going to be the V4 version. Everything we're doing here is going to be V4. Now here, before we added a name, but again, the reverse zone, you have to add a number. So our network, unfortunately, we didn't use much thought when we were putting in there. So our network number is just 10. It's not 10.0.0, it's just 10 because we used a mask of 255.0.0.0. And so if we had, for instance, a network of 10.0 with a mask of 255.255, then we put in a 10.0, but we just have 10 by itself. So the reverse lookup zone is going to be named 10 by itself. And we'll not do dynamic updates yet. And so we've got our reverse zone and our forward lookup zone. Now one of the things for the forward lookup zone, and I guess the name server, this has information on what our fully qualified domain name is. So our server is actually server helping up local. So it's the server name and then it's in this domain. And that's okay. But what we're going to do for this is we're going to put in a new host. Now we know, okay, and when we look at our other hosts that we'd like to add, we can look at 7.3 and we'll quickly look at its IP configuration. So the only two computers we have on our system right now are the Windows 7.3, which has the address of 10.0.0.2, and the Windows 8.1, which will have the address of 10.0.0.3. So if we switch back over to this, we're going to add a new host name, and we'll put that in 10.0.0.2. It's actually Win 7/3. Down here is where we put 10.0.0.2. And now this will say, do we want to associate a pointer record for that? Yes. Okay. And we'll put in the other one, which will be Win 8.1. And that was at 10.0.0.3, and we want to create the host record for that. Okay, and we'll say we're done for right now. So right now we've got our server, this computer, and this computer. Now for our reverse zones, we don't have the one for the server, and that's because our server was originally in there. It was originally in there and we didn't have to add it, but we had to add these two and it automatically added it. So if we go back to the reverse zone, and if we say we want to put in a new pointer, this will be 10.0.0.1, and the host name is going to be server. And now we have the listings that go from the IP address over to the name. Now we can test this out, and we'll minimize this. We can test this out by going into our command prompt, and one of the tools that we have in command prompt is called Nslookup. And what this is this is a name server lookup property. And what you can do is if you go in here and you can put in the name of it, it'll say Win73. Now, for some reason, our server should come up as our server address, but it's not. And it also has this address, which is signifying that it's using a v6 system. But it does give the full name, which is server 373 helping up local, and then it gives the DNS address. We can do the same thing with the Win 8-1. And it'll probably give the unknown server, and then it'll give the correct address. So that part of it's working. Now the other part of why the server is unknown, I'm not quite sure. But if we go back into our DNS, it works well. What happens is we're going to dynamically associate this with DHCP. And because we have such a small network, you can see what it does with relating names to numbers. But if you had a system that had 1,000 computers and each computer is changing their IP every day, there'd be no way you could statically put these in. So you have to dynamically put those in, and that's where the DHCP ties into the DNS server. And that we'll show that in part 2, and then hopefully some of the things like why that server wasn't resolved when we did the Nslookup, that will be resolved.